Good evening, and welcome to the first virtual town hall for the 22nd Legislative District. Tonight, you have all three of your local lawmakers, State Senator Sam Hunt and State Representatives Laurie Dolan and Jessica Bateman. If you would like to ask a question, please post that question in the comments, and a staff member will read it aloud to the lawmakers. Before we get started, here are some brief opening remarks from your 22nd District lawmakers.
All right. Thank you, Guy. I guess I'll start here. We're all getting used to this technology. We have a weird system going. I hope it's better for you than it is for me, because I can't see Representative Bateman, and I just see a frozen picture of Representative Dolan. Anyway, we'll get through this. Just quickly, several bills that I'm working on. We'll get through those quickly, but if they do have great interest to the 22nd District, there's a bill that will not deduct from people's retirement accrual for furloughs and job sharing. So if those who are subjected to furloughs, it will not negatively impact your retirement down the road. There's what we call the bridge year bill, which will allow high school students to participate for an extra year in extracurricular activities, debate, sports, and things like that, to try to give them a more fulfilling year than what they're seeing this year. There's a bill that will try to stabilize state employee resources so that you can take your chair home if you need it. You can have supplies. There are various agencies all over the board on this, so we're trying to standardize that and to help employees with de minimis use and to make sure that you have the equipment that you need for working at home and trying to drag all the agencies into virtual government, I guess. And then today I introduced Senate Bill 5426, which is a companion to a House bill that would create a billionaire's tax, and it would tax 1% of the intangibles over $1 billion. So if you have $1 billion, you better worry about this bill. If not, I don't think it'll impact you. And there are only, I think, 12 billionaires in the state that this would impact, and it would raise, oddly enough, about $2 billion a year just by that 1% tax. So those are several things. It's nice to be here. I'm glad to welcome Representative Bateman to our 22nd district team. And being, I guess, the old veteran here, this is my 21st year in the legislature. I look forward to it. And as we say, every year is different than the past. And we're going to try to get through a virtual session.
Great. Thanks, Senator Hunt. So I'll take it from there. I'd love to say it's nice to see all of you, but we're just assuming you're there because we actually can't see you, unfortunately. This is actually a lot more fun if we get to see you in person, but at least we get to talk to each other tonight. I am Laurie Dolan. This is starting my 5th year in this job. I will tell you once again, I've said this a lot, this job is like the frosting on the cake of my life. It's one of the greatest jobs I've ever had and wouldn't have it if you hadn't elected me. And for that, I am deeply appreciative. This year, my committees remain the same. I'm serving on appropriations. I'm vice chair of the K-12 Education Committee in the House, and I also serve on state government and tribal relations. So those are 3 great committees. I'll probably talk about bills I'm sponsoring along the way. But the other person I want to thank you for electing.
We lost Laurie for a second. Jessica, if you could talk a little. Oh wait, Laurie's back.
Is she? Are you back, Laurie?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to follow Guy's direction here.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so excited to see you. I can see in the chat function some familiar faces, although I can't see you in person. I'm so happy. Hi, Nicolette. I saw you earlier. Cynthia, Carolina, Kathy. I do wish we were in person, but this is a really great opportunity. So for those that don't know me, my name is Jessica Bateman. I'm the newly elected state representative for the 22nd Legislative District. I was a former city council member for the city of Olympia, where I served for 5 years. And before that, I was a legislative assistant to former state representative Chris Rakedahl. And I am excited and honored to be in this role and to get to work. We've really hit the ground running with this session. I am honored to serve on the Healthcare and Wellness Committee. I am vice chair of that committee, which is really exciting. And then I also serve on, someone's not on mute. Then I get to also serve on Housing, Human Services, and Veteran Affairs, and also the Capital Budget Committee, which is a lot of fun. I've got a couple bills that I'll just highlight. 2 are housing related, true to form. Housing is a big passion of mine. One is House Bill 1157, and that would help local governments that work on becoming more dense and environmentally friendly by creating more density in their cities, by giving them some revenue back to invest in housing. And then there's also 1350, which is a limited equity property tax exemption for cooperatives, limited equity cooperatives, which are housing home ownership opportunities for low income people where they buy into the cooperative and actually own a part of the building, which is, we don't have very many options for home ownership for low income folks. So that's a really great opportunity. And then I'm also working on House Bill 1218, which is the long-term care ombuds bill that I'm working on. It is in response to some of the challenges that we've experienced during COVID with vulnerable people in long-term care facilities having difficulty making contact with the outside world, and some isolation that's happened as a result of that. So I'm really really happy to be working on that piece of legislation. And then I will let us get started with the questions and be talking with you again in a minute. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. We have our first question, and if you are on this and want to ask a question, please type it in the chat and we will ask your lawmakers. The first question is for Senator Hunt, and it is, will we be able to keep the remote testimony features next year? The sign-in pro-con saves time, gas, and parking fees. And it's from Madeline.
The first thing in a meeting is always you're on mute. Thank you, Madeline. This is something I have worked on for a number of years, and unfortunately, the pandemic made it happen quicker than, maybe not unfortunately, but it happened quicker than what we thought. I think it's very beneficial to have the remote testimony and people who can, testify from the comfort of your home. Certainly in Olympia and this area, it's somewhat easier to come to the Capitol and testify, but the people north and in Eastern Washington, trying to come over the passes in a snowstorm on Snoqualmie or White Pass and do all that and get a motel room or something, and then the chair says, you have 3 minutes to give your testimony. So I think it's working very well, and I think we will look forward to continuing this and trying to find some way, when we ever get back to normal, to probably having a hybrid blend of in-person and remote testimony, so that a portion of each hearing will be set aside for remote testimony and a portion for live testimony. That's what I'd like to see anyway.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Erica. It is to Representative Dolan. And the question is, do you believe it's important to get kids back to in-person learning? If so, how will you ensure that they get back soon?
Thank you for that question, Erica. It's one of the more important questions that I'm dealing with every day. For those of you who know me, I spent 30 years with Spokane Public Schools, and I started out teaching first grade and ended up supervising school principals. And I think school is exactly where all of our kiddos need to be. Part of what's holding us up a bit is getting vaccinations out. And so many of us within the legislature have been putting pressure on the systems to say we need to vaccinate not only our teachers, but all of the adults that work with kids in our schools, because we want our teachers, our instructional assistants, our custodians, our bus drivers, we want all of them to be safe. And by having them all vaccinated, it's going to keep our kids safe. We have good protocols in place. My own grandson's in second grade, and he just went back to school last week. And his parents felt really safe about that, because they know that all the protocols are in place at his school. He gets to sit next to his best friend, but they're 6 feet apart and they're wearing masks, and the school's following all those protocols. So his parents felt plenty safe enough to send him back to school, and he was thrilled to get to ride the school bus again. So I think we need to watch the protocols. We need to hopefully get vaccinations to more people. I think with what's happening at the federal government right now, I hear they're even going to be in pharmacies soon. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, because yes, our kids need to be in school as soon as possible. Thanks for that great question.
Thank you. The next question is for Representative Bateman from Noreen, who asks, what are your ideas on how we can provide safe transitional housing to more people?
Thank you, Noreen, and thank you for the emails that you've sent in your advocacy. So I think first and foremost, we need to acknowledge the housing crisis that we're in prior to COVID, and now with COVID, we are facing a tsunami of individuals that could be evicted. There are thousands, tens of thousands of people in Washington state that are behind on their rent. So it's really important that we have a plan for how we're going to catch them up on rent and how we're going to make that sustainable, both for small landlords and then also for them, so they don't get evicted in the future, which is why it's so essential that the governor extended the eviction moratorium out to March, which is giving people time to know that they're safe in their homes for this period of time. And then also, we just voted in the House on Monday on early action legislation of $2.2 billion. And of that, we allocated $362 million to rental assistance, and foreclosure assistance and to pay for unpaid rent. And we also wanted to make sure that we could help folks that might be suffering from not having food and right now during this process. So we allocated $49 million for food and emergency cash assistance. In addition to those early action things, there are a couple of bills that I want to highlight. There is House Bill 1277, which is sponsored by Representative Ormsby, and that would increase the document recording fee that occurs when you sell a home, and that money would go to the Housing Trust Fund, which is where we use money to build affordable housing for Washingtonians. And also there's a portion that's pulled out specifically for permanent supportive housing, which is housing for chronically homeless individuals, which we're in desperate need of in Washington State. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. I'm really excited about it. There's also House Bill 1220, which and it's sponsored by Representative Peterson, and that would require cities to actually plan for and allow for shelter in their communities. Believe it or not, there are some cities in Washington State that try to do whatever they can to not have shelter, including zoning it out of their communities. So this bill would make sure that they actually have a plan for accommodating people in their community that are unhoused. I think those are the two that I'll highlight right now, but I'm happy to talk more about housing in another question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you're on this is a live virtual town hall with all three of your 22nd district lawmakers. The next question is from Nicolette, and it is to all three lawmakers. Do you support the wealth tax, which is in the House Bill 1406?
I think I'll jump in and take that one because I introduced the Senate version of the bill today. It is the same version. It had a hearing in the House yesterday, and I introduced my bill just as a backup in case that one runs into trouble, which I hope it doesn't. But all three of us are supporting, I don't call it a wealth tax, I call it what it is. It's a billionaire's tax. And, I think it's a very good piece of legislation, obviously, because I'm sponsoring it. But I hope that we can move it through the legislature.
So, Senator Hunt, I'm so glad you call it the billionaire's tax because I think that's less confusing for voters. I think when we call it a wealth tax, there's always that fear that, elected officials are going to come for me next. So wealth might mean I make $40,000 a year and I'm going to have to pay a wealth tax on that. That is not what we mean. And by calling it the billionaire tax, you're explaining exactly who we would like to collect that tax from to make our tax system in Washington State more progressive. So thanks for the billionaire tax, Senator Hunt.
And I would just love to pay that tax.
I bet you would. You're going to have to work a lot more years.
A long way away.
I'll just chime in. We, especially being the capital city, we're one of the most labor dense cities because we house so much state government here. We have a lot of public sector workers that are acutely aware of our regressive tax system. In addition to that, it really undermines our ability to have a robust social safety net, to have, working jobs, workforce development, all these essential things for our communities. So thank you, Senator Hunt, for your billionaire's tax. I co-sponsored the wealth tax that's sponsored by Representative Noel Frame, but it's also really important to note that there is a tax reform work group that Representative Frame is co-chair of with a Republican co-chair. It's bipartisan. And the aim of that group, who's been working for years, is to evaluate our current tax breaks or tax preferences, which I think we have over 700 of them, and really reevaluating them to determine, are there tax preferences that we currently have that are no longer providing a benefit to the public that warrants that tax preference. If we're going to give a tax preference, it really should be paying back to the state and our communities. And that's really important that we do that while we also focus on things like wealth tax, capital gains tax to increase progressive revenue in our state. Thank you.
I just want to add one thing as an example. I heard the other day that Jeff Bezos, until this week, the executive at Amazon, in one day during the COVID made $10 billion. 10 billion. So certainly taxing Jeff Bezos and some of those other people for 1% of their gross, and I don't mean that in terms of number, but gross income, certainly wouldn't send them to the poorhouse. On the other hand, the lowest income people in the state on the average, pay 17% of their income to taxes, while those at the top pay less than 3%.
I was explaining this to some people on a Zoom call today, and I was saying, you know, when Jeff Bezos goes in to buy a sweater, he pays the same amount of sales tax as a person working on minimum wage pays for a sweater. And the person I'm explaining that to says, but they wouldn't buy the same sweater. And I said, well, if they did, they'd pay the same amount of sales tax. And that's what's wrong. Part of what's wrong with our system in Washington State is our three main taxes, and sales tax, I think, is the one that the state makes the most money off of, really is a regressive tax. So we all feel passionately about that. So I'm going to go on to the next question. We had a survey question from Paul, and it's all about vaccinations again. And if we really want our public schools open, why don't we move, I'm not going to say teachers, I'm going to say all the adults involved in K-12 to the top of the list. And those lists initially were made by the Department of Health, the governor's office, in consultation with the Department of Health. And really they were going by the most vulnerable citizens. And those are the people that are regularly out in the public in minimum wage jobs often. So those who are picking our food, those who are sacking our groceries at the grocery store. They have to come to work. We depend on them. They're essential, yet they're constantly around people, and their vectors are the world. With schools, we can control it a little more tightly because we know the students and we know how to do all the protocols in place. But it's become very clear, I think, to most of us in Washington State that if we want schools to open, we really do need to move our school employees to the top of that list. We have been making choices about vaccines that are very limited in supply. So we've been making choices based on scarcity. My big hope is within the next month, we can make choices based on we'll have plenty of vaccinations. And I'll tell you one fun thing I heard today. So our public school employees, PSE, they have been going together with Safeway and setting up all sorts of vaccination sites around the state. And that was pretty exciting to see that we have that kind of volunteer effort going together to get all the vaccinations into people's arms.
Thank you so much. We have a question now for Representative Bateman. It is from Keegan, who asks, how will you go about stabilizing the housing market, especially as it regards to tenants? And also, would you be in favor of supporting a tenants union as a way to fill the gap between tenant need and tenant negotiating power?
Thank you. So for housing in Washington State, it's really important to think about where we're starting. We have a huge supply and demand problem when it comes to housing, which unfortunately makes the folks that need housing or are renters really being at a disadvantage, because the folks that actually own that rental have a lot of power because there's so many people that are in need of housing. There's an organization called Up for Growth, and they just put out a report last year that showed in Washington we need 250,000 units of housing to keep up with our current population growth. So that's the gap that we're experiencing right now. So the very first thing that we need to do to stabilize the housing market is make it more of an equal playing field, meaning there is an abundance of housing and diverse housing options, especially near high opportunity areas where people can work, where there's amenities, where there's recreation. What we're seeing now is, because of the lack of housing, a lot of people that are in cities that are high opportunity areas that have lived there for a long time are seeing their rents go up. They're being priced out of the market, so they're having to live further out. For instance, in Thurston County, people having to move to Tenino or Chehalis, even further out, and then they're having to commute. And it's the same in Seattle and other areas. And that's really a disadvantage, and it's really not equitable because folks can't afford to live in the cities that they actually work in. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to be really optimistic about creating housing and housing for everyone and diverse housing options. I completely support increasing tenants unions. We don't have one here in Thurston County, and it's a great opportunity to help equal that playing field and give tenants more power in the negotiation process and establishing more rights for themselves and working as a group. I'd love to see that happen. There's also some bills that are really amazing that because I'm on the housing committee. So Representative Ty has worked on a bill, actually it's a Representative Macri has worked on a bill. It's a good cause eviction. So requiring more notice for people, not being able to evict people just because for no reason, and giving them 20 days notice, giving them more time, and then actually having to have a reason. This is something that's been popular and been talked about, and I'm excited about that possibility because it will give people more stability and consistency. And there's also a Representative Gregerson bill. We're also seeing mobile home parks being bought up, and the folks that live in those mobile home parks, it's some of the lowest income housing available. And sometimes they own the mobile home, but they don't own the land underneath it. So if that property gets purchased, they have nowhere to go. So then there are virtually no places that they can go to that have comparable rent prices. So that bill would actually give those mobile home tenants more time, and it would require that the property owners actually give them the opportunity to create a collective and to buy that property. And so that's a really great opportunity to help give people a little bit more stability, more time, and would hopefully prevent people from falling into homelessness. Those are a couple ideas. I have more I could talk about if you want to talk with me offline, but we're in a housing crisis and we need to do everything we can to address it. Thank you.
We have a question now from the live chat, and it is about Senate Bill 5214 to Senator Hunt, the TANF reform bill. Kathy is asking what the status of that bill is.
Wouldn't you know, I looked up the wrong number, guy. Take another question. I'll get back to you.
If all three of you could talk about the COVID relief bill that just passed, that would be great.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy. I'd be happy to talk about that.
Committee on Human Services and is scheduled for action by the committee on Friday at 10:30.
Thank you, Sam. Go ahead with the COVID bill.
So let me talk about the federal $2.2 billion that we just passed off the House floor last. About it in relation to K-12 education. The money that's going out to K-12 education, which is substantial, it takes $668 million to put into our K-12 schools to address learning loss. And the money needs to go out under the same formula that the federal government spends Title I money. So it goes to schools, more money goes to schools in deeper poverty than schools who are not in deeper poverty. And it can be spent on Title I, it can be spent on COVID kinds of expenses that the schools have all had really building up because of all the different protocols and safety measures they needed to be put in place. For example, 2 bus routes a day instead of 1 bus route because the kids can't sit next to each other in bus seats. So the money can be spent on Title I, it can be spent on COVID things. It can also be spent on catching kids up who have missed so much school time that they're further behind academically. So call it remediation. I like to call it accelerated learning for the kids who need more help with that. So I'm guessing we're going to see quite a few summer programs set up for over the summer to help our students catch up. So when fall comes, and heaven forbid, we hope schools open and enrollment's back, that they'll be caught up as much academically as they can. And some of this federal money is going to help with that. What the federal money doesn't cover is state programs like LAP, the Learning Assistance Program, or special ed, or skills centers, or levy equalization. So there's some really critical programs that the state funds that the federal money is not going to help with. So I actually just dropped a bill yesterday. It's House Bill 1476, if you want to look it up, and it's all about enrollment stabilization. So what it's saying is we'll get the federal money out, and then we'll come in with state money and backfill all the programs that are dependent on enrollment. And so if districts are really down in enrollment, this bill allows them to use their 2019-20 enrollment for the calculations for all the money for all those programs. So it's a combination. It's working out the federal money and how it works with the state money, and it should make our schools whole. So we should see a lot less staff being laid off between now and the end of the year. Just so you know, the caseload forecast for K-12 for next year shows that they're anticipating we're going to have more students than we've had before. So more students would be in school than were even there before COVID. We even heard the name COVID. So that would be exciting if that happens. Our fingers are crossed. But in the meantime, these bills and the federal money are going to hopefully keep our school districts enough in the black that they won't have to lay off more staff.
Thank you so much for that update. If you're on this, it is a live virtual town hall with all 3 of your 22nd district lawmakers. We have a question now from Madison to Representative Bateman. And the question is, how do you plan to support those experiencing homelessness while struggling with mental health?
Thank you. I'm getting all the housing questions. I love it. So I think for folks that are struggling, chronically homeless folks, are if you look at the overall homeless population, it's a small subset of people that are chronically homeless, and unfortunately they often get overlooked, and it's really hard to get them access to services, and some can have chronic health conditions or behavioral health needs. And so permanent supportive housing is really thought of as the best investment that we can make, because the solution that folks that are unhoused need is housing. That's the very first step, and there shouldn't be prerequisites or requirements for getting that housing. It should just be housing first, similar to the very first home fund project, which is on Martin Way, which is low barrier housing and permanent supportive housing for people. So we, like I said before, have a bill that will, the document reporting fee, which is going to increase funding for our housing trust fund. The housing trust fund ask this year from the legislature or in the governor's budget is the largest investment in the housing trust fund in recognition of the huge challenge that we're facing. But we also really, really need to invest in permanent supportive housing, and that needs to happen in communities across Washington state. One budget proviso that I'm working on for our state, we have Medicaid for folks, and I want to make sure that they can get access to services. It's called medical respite. We had in Olympia an unhoused person that was in the hospital emergency room with a leg wound, and there was nowhere for them to go once their surgery was done. And that's taking up a valuable bed space. It's costing money from the state that pays for Medicaid when that person really needs to get into housing and not be sitting in the emergency room. Unfortunately, we didn't have any shelter and we didn't have any housing for that person to go to. What they really need is to go into permanent support housing. What this would do would be able to provide medical respite as a benefit for a Medicaid patient in this circumstance, so they could go to a medical respite facility and get help and assistance getting back on their feet and getting healthy. And then the long-term objective is really getting permanent supportive housing, but that is an interim step that I think is really critical. And cities across the state, it's humane, it's the right thing to do, it's cost-effective. So that's a budget proviso that I'm working on right now. And we just need to work on building more housing, providing more housing. The Housing Trust Fund is the primary conduit for that in our state. And then also cities across the state have the ability to pass home funds themselves by a councilmanic vote, thanks to former Representative Beth Dolio, who got that bill across the finish line. And locally here, I think Commissioner Carolina Mejia is on. The county can actually vote to pass a home fund and provide funding for affordable housing in Thurston County. That would be very, very, it would benefit a lot of people in our community, and Lacey and Tumwater also have that opportunity. So you can also ask your local electeds to help support housing.
Thank you so much. If you're on this and want to ask a question, please type it in the chat and we will read it aloud. The next question is from Tyler, and it is about how are you going to help people that have lost their jobs?
So I'll go ahead and start, and I'm sure we'll all probably want to answer a piece of this. You know, the state was pretty fast to react when COVID hit, and it became clear that Washingtonians needed additional help, and we did that with unemployment insurance. We sent out state money to support citizens, And as we all know, with the unemployment insurance, it was so popular that there was no way that agency could have been set up to deal with all of the people who needed help. And I have to tell you, our legislative assistants, it's almost like they turned into so.
We've lost Representative Dolan. We have a question.
Legislative assistants, for those of you who've contacted them, have done a masterful job in trying to help citizens work their way through government agencies and how to get assistance. This $2.2 billion that we just voted on, and it's going to go out as soon as the Senate votes on it, there's $6 million in there for healthcare for underinsured and uninsured individuals. There's $65 million for immigrant assistance, and there's another $5 million for college student assistance. And there's an additional $66 million for long-term care and developmental disabilities programs. So those are just some of the ways we're putting a chunk of money into helping our most vulnerable citizens. And it's very possible that with what we're hearing from Congress, there could be more federal money coming. So we'll see how that plays out. But I can let Sam and Jessica jump in here too.
Go ahead, Jess.
Okay, I can't see anyone except for myself, so I never know.
I know.
I'll just also add that we, in our $2.2 billion that we just passed, we included money for small businesses, so $240 million to contribute to small business grants. It's really important that we can help our small businesses get back on their feet, as well as making sure that we get our COVID vaccinations out, we get as many people vaccinated as possible so we can safely reopen that economy. There's a lot of folks that have been out of work in the service industry, service sector. We want to make sure that they can be safe and also work. And I think we're all pulling for people. We want to make sure that people get back to work. We also really need the federal government and the federal stimulus to step up and help us and give states some more revenue so we can do even more, which I believe that we will.
And I would just add that we passed a major bill in the House and Senate this last week to, what can I say, to cut unemployment costs for employees and to make sure that they don't have 300, 400% increases, and it will still keep the unemployment system viable and everything. But they face some huge increases, and we've managed by an agreement with the House and Senate and labor and business and Republicans and Democrats to pass this bill overwhelmingly, and look forward to the governor signing more step. And of course, the big thing is we need some federal help on this.
Thank you so much for those answers, and thank you for your questions. If you're live on this and want to ask a question of your lawmakers, type it in the chat and we will read it out loud. The next question is to all of you. It's from Dale, and he asks, what is your favorite piece of legislation this session?
My favorite piece of legislation is a bill from Senator Leas from Mukilteo area, Snohomish County, that would prohibit feeding garbage to pigs. We've had a lot of fun with that. It's actually a serious thing because pig farmers have sold their pigs, and people are buying pigs and feeding garbage to them, and then they're spreading diseases. So while it's a fun topic, it's an interesting little bill. But I think my favorite, obviously, I coupled the billionaire tax and the two bills for education and to make sure that state employees have their resources.
So I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about a bill that was brought to me by our own Thurston County auditor, and it's House Bill 1068. And I think probably everybody on this call is aware that there are hackers with really bad intent who constantly are trying to get into our election systems, both at the county level and at the state level. And in order to protect themselves from those hackers, our county auditors work closely with like the Department of Homeland Security to do tests on their systems to find out where they're vulnerable. Right now, the result of those tests, which outline exactly where they're the most vulnerable are open to public disclosure. So the very hackers who want to destroy our election systems could go to Auditor Mary Hall and say, by the way, we want the report that you worked on with Homeland Security because we want to know exactly where you're vulnerable, because that will help us do our job as hackers. So what the bill does, House Bill 1068, is it actually takes that piece, that little small piece, out of public disclosure. So if someone comes in and says, we want those reports that you're working on at the Department of Homeland Security about hackers and how they best can get into the system, Mary Hall can say, sorry, you can't have that. That's not something that I can disclose to you. So it doesn't take away any of the other transparencies we all expect in our election system. It just protects against that one vulnerability that we actually don't want to share with hackers. So it's kind of a fun bill. People don't quite understand it when they hear about it. I've gotten many emails about, why do you want to take public disclosure out of elections? And it has nothing to do with that. We want to make elections as transparent and open to the public as possible. It would also include, like, if there's a successful breach of a system, auditors still can publicly explain all that to the public. It has nothing to do with those kinds of situations. It has everything to do with protecting the vulnerable pieces of our election system that they're working on fixing.
And on that same note, my favorite bill isn't one of mine. There's so many to choose from. There's some incredible bills out this year, but the one that I'm the most excited about is House Bill 1078. It really just gets at what we've been working on for so many years. We lead the country in voter access and the ability to get people the right to vote. Thanks a lot to Senator Sam Hunt and others who've been working on this for years. And the House Bill 1078 will actually restore voting rights for persons that are convicted of a felony. And I feel like that's just a glaringly obvious way that we can do even more to increase voter access in Washington. And as we've seen, especially this year with voter suppression tactics and everything happening with the fight for our democracy, I think it's more important than ever that we do that. And it is being sponsored by Representative Tara Simmons, and she is, I think, the first in the country formerly incarcerated person to be elected to a state legislature. She is fantastic. And I believe this bill actually, Representative Dolan has worked on this bill before. So kudos to Representative Dolan. And they gracefully let Tara carry this one this year because she has such a compelling story. And, you know, it really helps people when they see someone that has been incarcerated getting elected to the state legislature. It lets people know anyone can do this. We are a citizen legislature where anyone can be elected to office and do the work of the people. So it's an inspiring story from Representative Simmons. And then it's also a really, really good bill with a great history here with our very own Representative Dolan working on that.
Thank you all so much. We have a question now from Rachel to all three of you. What are you doing to fight climate change and support the switch to clean energy?
So I'm probably not the person with the best content knowledge on this, but I'm just going to tell you what I know. There's a very exciting bill that's being jointly written between some senators and some representatives that would actually approach climate change in with a slightly different tactic, where bonds would be issued and money would be raised through bond sales to actually then do more green kinds of work with industry and buildings. So it wouldn't be cap and trade. It's a different approach to funding climate change work than cap and trade. So I think it's going to be dropped next week. I don't know the bill number, but for those of you who care deeply about climate change, watch for that, because it's pretty exciting to think there might be a different way to fight for a better climate.
And I'll just add, there's a Representative Doer bill that works on requiring cities. So cities across the state are required to create comprehensive plans, which is basically like a strategic plan for how a city is going to grow over the next 20 years. It requires a lot of resident engagement from community members and planning for things like how you're going to accommodate housing, what types of amenities do you want, et cetera. And this bill would require cities to actually plan for mitigating climate change in their planning processes and putting that into our Growth Management Act, which is a state law that mandates that cities do this planning. It's really essential that this is a part of the planning process and that people are planning for that and taking that into account. Fortunately, here in Thurston County, your three cities, Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater, they're all working jointly on a climate action plan, working together to figure out how we're going to reduce in the county, how we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions collectively, because we're all so close together, which is great, but not all cities are doing that. So I think it is vital that we have that in the Growth Management Act and that cities are required to plan for that. Obviously, the state needs to be providing assistance for them because, especially for smaller cities, it's going to be a bit of a burden for them. There's also House Bill 1091, which is the clean fuel standard, which I'm really excited about, and I hope that we get that passed this legislative session. There is also House Bill 1220, which is 1280 concerning greenhouse gas emission reductions in the design of public facilities. There's also 1287, which is concerning preparedness for zero emission transportation future. We're working on a number of pieces of legislation this year related to energy, the environment, and climate change. A good place to look is the Clean Energy and Environment Committee. It's just the Environment Committee. I don't know why I'm adding energy into there. But Representative Fitzgibbon is the chair of that committee, and they're covering a lot of environmental work and climate change work. So get a hold of that committee and check out their agenda.
Thank you so much. We have a question now from the live chat from Kim, and it is about what specifically do you feel is the most critical police reform policy that needs to be implemented this session?
Well, I'll start with that because Guy sort of teed up one in advance here. Senate Bill 5038, which bans open carry at public demonstrations and would make the Capitol campus a gun or firearm-free zone. I think that's a very important step. It's a Senator Cooter bill, and she graciously took my proposal to ban firearms on the campus and put it into this bill. So that's one. And I would just add that there are like 14 bills dealing with law enforcement, people of color, trying to get racial justice and police justice going forward. And we'll see a number of those this year, and it's hard to prioritize because they're all very important. Banning chokeholds, banning use of tear gas and things like that. We're going to consider a lot of those as we go through this session.
I would add independent investigations is another one of those bills that I think is critically important. In the House, we have a large group of members of color, and they have taken upon themselves to write most of these bills. And we are all basically their helpers because they have lived the experience more than any of the white folk among us. And so they're the ones who have selected the bills that we're working on right now. And Jess, are you going to talk more about this? Do you want to? I can turn this over to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So Laurie got into a little bit of it, but I think it is important to note that there has been a group of representatives in the House that have been working on police reform legislation for over 9 months. And that group is comprised of all representatives of color, and they are leading on this, and we are assisting and supporting. There are 5 bills that I'll mention. These are not all inclusive, but they are noteworthy and will go a long way, and they're all priorities of this work group. So House Bill 1054, which is sponsored by Representative Johnson, that's the one that will ban chokeholds, neck restraints, limiting the use of police dogs, banning military equipment, so police departments would not be able to buy military equipment, prohibiting the intentional covering of a badge, prohibiting no-knock warrants. So these are all priorities to make sure that, and that's all in one bill. And not firing at moving vehicles. These are things that I think we would think are common sense, but it would be really great if they were established in state law. There's also House Bill 1092, which establishes a centralized, regularly updated database to report incidents of police use of force and other police interactions with the public. And it would require that every law enforcement agency in Washington report to this registry. It's really hard if we can't track that information and those reports, so this would require them to do that. House Bill 1089 authorizes the state auditor to conduct compliance audits to make sure that local law enforcement agencies are complying with the requirements for those independent investigations pursuant to Initiative 940. And then House Bill 1082, which restructures and expands the process of law enforcement decertification and the imposition of other state level sanctions for police misconduct. And then the very last one, which is House Bill 1088, which standardizes the process by which police misconduct is reported to and maintained by the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And for the purpose of potentially impeaching the police officer testimony at trial. So those are a handful. I think that there are at least 4 or 5 more. We can definitely send an update. I know this is a priority for our constituents. So I think what we're going to do is in our next e-newsletter, we'll go ahead and put all of those pieces of legislation in one place for you, so you can see not only the legislation, but where they're at in the process and opportunities for you to engage and advocate for them. It would be really great for us to get your support and show that those are laws that we really need in Washington state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one more question to all 3 of you and then closing statements. The question is from Claire, and Claire is asking, there are kids who have experienced nearly half of high school remotely. How are we helping them graduate on time?
So Claire mentioned the House Bill 1121, I think it is. I just moved my screen and I can't see it. Guys, 1121?
Yes.
Okay, so we just passed that out of the K-12 Education Committee in the House. And what that basically does is it gives the State Board of Education the ability to say to school districts and teachers who know the students the best that they don't have to pass every single credit as they would under normal years. So they can actually have some of that waived with their teachers and educators' support so they aren't stuck in high school taking credits that actually in the long run of their life aren't going to make that much of a difference, and they need to get on to college. So for those kids, this bill will give the flexibility to schools who know the kids best to make those decisions with the students and the parents. And Sam, I think you need to talk again about your great bill.
Yeah, my bill, for those of you who take numbers, is 5265, which would allow students to compete or participate for an extra year in extracurricular and intercollegiate activities. They must be still enrolled in high school or in what do we call it? College in this high school, or
Running
Start. What is it? Anyway,
Running Start.
Running Start. They aren't high school graduates, and I think there are a lot of high school seniors and juniors who aren't taking a full load. And certainly debate, band, speech, athletics have suffered this year. So that will give them an extra year to participate in that and hopefully fulfill their a more meaningful high school experience.
I'm going to pass it on to you for closing remarks now, starting with Jessica, and then to round the horn.
Who's Ruby?
There was a request in the chat for Ruby, who was in her kennel, because I didn't want her to interrupt this very important town hall. But as you can see, if someone whistles, Sam, whistle.
Here, Ruby.
Isn't she adorable? Yeah. So she brightens my day, especially when she's with me in this office for 50 hours a week. Thank you for requesting that, Kathy. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. We are so fortunate to have all of you being so engaged, and I'm looking at the screen of all the names that are here tonight, and I know not only are you engaged in this town hall, but you're all doing really incredible work in our communities all over Thurston County. So thank you for your public service, your volunteerism, your engagement, your advocacy. You enable us to advocate for even more progressive policies in the legislature and help advocate there when we need you to. So thank you so much. We look forward to engaging with you, and keep in touch during session. Just reach out if you ever want to get in touch. You'll see our contact information at the end. Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and say goodbye too. And Jess, nice job, because it's all the truth. We actually live in the 22nd, where I maintain we have the very best constituents of any place else in the state. You know, most of our constituents, we either state employees or they're retired state employees, and so you know government, you know good government. You bring us great bills ready to drop. You give us advice on what committees we should be on, and we love interacting with you on all of those issues. The other thing I'll mention is people seem to think they can only come see us during the legislative session. So we're your neighbors. We're here year round, and we're happy to meet with you anytime year round. So come see us sometime in like August. That would be fun, and we'd have more time to talk. So thank you for the seat meets I get to serve with. We really like each other here in the 22nd, which makes working together even more fun. And thank you for hanging in there. Stay safe, wear your masks. We'll get the vaccinations out as quick as we can, and we'll try to get life back to what might be normal. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say, we're as frustrated as everybody else. I have a first grade grandson that I would very much like to see in school. So would his mom. We'd like to be able to be out and be touched and see each other. And hopefully, not hopefully, but that will happen. But we're going to fight through this. We're going to beat the pandemic, and hopefully after session, we can have a town hall meeting back at South Puget Sound Community College or somewhere like that, where we can actually see each other and maybe eat some of those fine cookies that South Puget Sound often provides for us. So, and again, as Representative Dolan said, you have our email addresses. Those still work, even though we're working from home, and I'm hiding in my basement, but we're around, and we look forward to working with you. And we do look forward to seeing you after session or after the pandemic, so we can break bread and have a beer together and talk about legislation and other things. So thank you.
Thank you to all three lawmakers, and thank you so much to everyone who came and participated and asked questions. And that is the end of our event. Good night.